and accordingly New Zealand First supports this motion. Kia ora.
I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Like other opposition members, we support this report in respect of the Ombudsman, the Parliamentary Commissioner of the Environment and the Auditor-General. But can I start by echoing some of the concerns that other members have raised? And if I start with the Auditor-General, I want to take this opportunity to thank the Auditor-General and her officials for the work they do, particularly in relation to something close to a number of our hearts, at least on this side of the House, solid energy. Because had it not been for the Auditor-General, after 12 months of waste, mismanagement, lack of governance, number of years lack of oversight by the Minister of SOEs and his shareholding minister, the Finance Minister, after the government turned down a request for a ministerial inquiry, an independent inquiry, and then the government's toadies on the Commerce and lackeys on the Commerce Select Committee blocked at every attempt, a request for an inquiry. It was the Auditor-General, after I wrote to her, after the banking issues had been settled, after we had lost $400 million and 800 jobs to date, it was only the office, the independent office of the Auditor-General, who agreed to hold a limited, I accept that, a limited inquiry into what happened in terms of solid energy. And to date, that's all we've got. She made inquiries into the governance and management and decisions that were made between the previous board and the previous chief executive and the previous management group. She looked at communication flows. She did not believe, and I think, to be fair to her, she is legally precluded, or at least did not believe it was appropriate to look at ministerial accountability. And although the Auditor-General did a superb job within the offices and within the mandate she had, even after that inquiry, we are still no further ahead in finding out who or which individuals are accountable for the biggest collapse of an SOE in our history. 800 jobs gone, $400 million down the gurgler, mismanagement, bonuses, extravagant expenditure, a chief executive who ended up going on gardening leave, having to pry the truth out of solid energy through the instrument of a financial review, unsupported by the government, unsupported by ministers who today just simply do not want to know. A Minister, Tony Ryle, who will go down in history as the worst, most negligent and most incompetent Minister of SOEs that we have had to date in New Zealand's history. Likewise, Bill English, piles, feet, metres of paper and warnings from Treasury, from UBS, the consultants who ironically were sent in to scope solid energy for sale, warning signs including just the ability to open the newspaper and work out that the coal price had blown apart, that international markets such as China were reducing their volumes purchased, and yet ministers knew this. Ministers did not sack anyone. Mr Ryle, of course, was fond of trying to portray that board members resigning was as a result of him. No one got sacked, except 800 workers who paid to try and keep the show on the road, paid with their jobs. No one in the executive team or the board got sacked. No intervention to change the statement of corporate intent by the Minister of SOEs. Absolutely nothing happened. Total and utter incompetence. And had it not been for the, and worse than incompetence, every avenue of inquiry blocked, every attempt to provide answers for taxpayers blocked, every attempt to find someone or the group of people who were accountable blocked. Of course, the Minister would never say it was him, washed his hands of it. Had it not been for the Auditor-General finally agreeing to hold a limited inquiry, we wouldn't even have the answers we have today, sir. So I thank the Auditor-General for her response and for again showing the value that she adds to our little democracy. I also want to come to the Ombudsman, and Dave Beverley Wakeham, like the Auditor-General and her officers and officials, do an outstanding job. We've already heard from Grant Robertson how for years, I would argue deliberately, this government starved that office of resources. We've already heard that that office was funded for around 1,000 to 1,200 complaints per year under action and open at any given time, you glance at the annual report and it indicated that the office received 13,684 complaints, an increase of 29% for the 11-12 year. And then we get to the earthquake complaints. And of course, Mr Brownlee got up. Of course, Mr Brownlee has presided over a government agency which has broken the law in terms of the OIA for months, for nigh on a year. Mr Brownlee presided over an agency that simply has thumbed its nose at the OIAs put in by earthquake victims. Now, Mr Brownlee got up and said, well, you know, the only reason is that these complaints have increased, it's all these opposition members of Parliament. Well, that's partly true, because our job, why we get the Queen's shilling, is to actually try and prize information and the truth and some facts out of this mob over here. But that does not actually explain the hundreds and hundreds of OIA requests that earthquake victims have made. And you've got to ask yourself, and Mr Brownlee doesn't seem to sort of quite get it, why have people, ordinary folk, in deep difficulty in terms of navigating their personal arrangements with EQC and trying to get their lives and their houses back, why would they go to the extent of using the OIA? Well, quite simple if you look at the litany of an incompetence in respect of EQC. The OIA is the only avenue they have. The only avenue, and the Ombudsman in her report to the Government Administration Committee, I believe it was, cited that fact absolutely, that people have run out of gas. They write to the Minister, they get nowhere. They, for instance, ring EQC, as one case has, or at least one case, 5 different phone calls to EQC in one day to get 5 different answers. Commitments to give information, commitments to give scope of works, which materialise in nothing. So maybe they write to the Minister, they get nowhere there. They come to members of Parliament like ourselves on this side, we write to the Minister, we get nowhere. So the last opportunity they have, apart from going to court, and sadly most of them don't have a lot of dough to do that, is to use the OIA. And we know that Jerry Brownlee knowingly, as a minister, even though he blames his department, I tell you, I say they will put a silver plaque up in this chamber, a silver plaque, in tribute to Jerry Brownlee the day he comes out and says, I take responsibility for the stuff-ups in my agency called EQC. I say to you, Mr Speaker, they will erect, because of Jerry Brownlee, the apologist for the insurance industry, the big end of town, the day Jerry Brownlee actually says, I take responsibility, not I'm disappointed with my chief executive, or I'm disappointed with EQC, or they didn't tell me, or I didn't read the briefing paper, woe is me. No, one day he may get up and say, I take responsibility for my department, and I'm going into C.N. Simpson, and by hell I'm going to sort it out. That will be a red letter historic day in this Parliament for that minister. And if you look at what the Ombudsman said, she said in terms of processing OIAs where they've broken the law time and again by breaching the deadline, one of the problems is the sort of hierarchy and mishmash of approvals that basic OIAs have to go through. And it's really interesting when you look at the questions from EQC. They were asked basically how many OIAs from opposition members and our opposition research units go through the Minister's office for approval. 96%. 96% go up to Mr Brownlee's office, where they're sat on for a period of time until he deems it appropriate that they be released. And the other interesting thing is, for instance, it took 72 days for my office to actually get a copy of EQC's internal structure, which should have been on their website anyway, 72 days using an OIA to get the basic EQC structure. It took 200 days plus for me to get, on behalf of the a group We Can that is helping and advocating for earthquake victims, a basic OIA that you'd think after 200 days would have measured in several metres high. It was about 2 reams of paper. 200 days plus, even after they had said to We Can, who put the original OIA in, we'll accept it, but we want $24,000 from a community group to process it. So I took it over, and they daren't charge a member of Parliament because that becomes a big issue. They can pull the wool and try it. And they'd accepted it, and their first salvo to me was, we'll consider whether we accept it. There's a culture in that place, right up to the Minister's office, that thumbs its nose at the Ombudsman, and is quite happy, that Minister is, for his agency to continue to break the law and not provide people with the information they require. Mr Brownlee has made a rod for his own back.
I recognise the honourable